name is Alex. I am the lead press operator and mad scientist in residence for Indigo Inc. digital printing. The following is a format-adapted talk that we brought to Chicago this year for Paper Specs Live, a day-long extravaganza celebrating excellence in print, paper, and good design. We hope you enjoy it, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We are always available, and we love hearing from people. Good morning, fellow paper nerds. My name is Alex. I am the lead press operator and mad scientist in residence for Indigo Inc. digital printing. Joining me today we have Liz and Matt Richardson, founders of the company and possibly the only check on my insanity. Without them, none of this would be possible. My eternal gratitude to them. Indigo Inc. is a full-service digital print shop located in Columbia, Maryland, just outside Baltimore. We have a passion for craftsmanship, customer service, and ecological conservation, and we have a crew of creative, obsessive print nerds keeping the machines running. We have a lot to get through today, so let's dive right in. We're here to talk about sleeking foil. For those of you who are new to foil and digital embellishment, here's a quick rundown of the 3 techniques that are most commonly used to apply foil. It's not an exhaustive list, but it is a good point of comparison. Traditional foil stamping has been around for well over 100 years, and the process hasn't changed much. Sandwich a sheet of paper between an engraved metal die and a layer of foil, and the design will transfer with heat and pressure. This gives you the option of embossing or debossing the foil, depending on how the die is configured. Polymer foil uses a specialized inkjet head to build up layers of clear polymer, which are cured under intense UV light before having adhesive foil applied, producing an embossed, bubbly foil effect. Sleeking foil splits the difference. The process is similar to polymer, but instead of printing raised designs on dedicated hardware, an existing toner-based printing press is used to create a template in black ink before a specially formulated foil is applied. To see what this looks like in practice, let's take a look at a short video showcasing the production of one of my favorite pieces.
Let us walk you through how we produce this.
Every foil print starts with a blank sheet of paper. For Titan, we're using 130-pound Explorer silk cover stock. It's very smooth, extremely stable, and performs incredibly well for all types of foil. To start this process, we're laying down anywhere between 4 and 10 layers of ink, depending on the material we're working with, the color of foil, and the complexity of the design. For Titan, we're using 6 layers of black ink. The press sheet then comes to our matrix sleeking foiler, which we've loaded with printable gold foil. Using a combination of a high heat and pressure, a special adhesive is activated that sticks to the ink, but not to the rest of the sheet. Leaving us a beautifully foiled press sheet. The foiled press sheet is then loaded back into our Indigo for the overprint. By now the paper has gone through 2 full heating cycles and has changed size and shape, so we always use the first 2 sheets to make sure that everything's lined up and nothing's changed position. Once it's output, the rest of the CMYK design is overprinted on the foil, and we are 99% of the way there. For a final touch, we bring the printed piece to our UV coater, forming a shiny, scratch-resistant layer that brings out the best of the color and protects the finish. Once the sheet is cooled, everything is cut to size, leaving us a perfect and extremely shiny piece of art. There are a few things to keep in mind when comparing foil technologies. The first and most obvious is the finished effect. It's worth noting that none of these techniques are in competition with one another. They all have their place, and certain projects are better suited to one than another. It all depends on what you're going for. We offer traditional hot stamping for that exact reason. Some projects are just better suited to it. If you want that tactile effect, hot stamping and polymer foil will both enable it. What the flat foil produced with sleeking enables is layering in extremely short runs. For practical purposes, if we can print it, we can foil it. All that's needed for a print shop to offer sleeking is a toner-based printing press and a modified laminator. For this reason, it's very easy to find shops that offer this as a process. It is harder to find one that's really good at it, and that's because this is both a hardware and an operator-limited process. There are no shortcuts in sleeking. Every part of the process requires the right equipment and constant attention, and a shop that's missing either will produce poor quality foil. So, how do you find a print partner you can trust? The first step is to find out if they have the right hardware. When shopping for a partner, they may refer to the process as sleeking foil, digital flat foil, or fusing foil. Sleeking requires a toner-based printing press, not inkjet. We found HP Indigo is ideal for reasons I'll explain later, but any machine utilizing hot fused toner will work with this process. Second, they need either an appropriately modified laminator or a dedicated sleeking system. The latter are new and still pretty rare, but they show a lot of promise. See if you can get samples. While good samples are not always proof of competency, a shop that lets poor quality promotional samples out the door should always be concerning when it comes to the quality of paid jobs. This is an actual sample from another print shop who will go unnamed. Needless to say, it's not their best work, but it is a poor first impression. Talk to the shop. Find out their tolerances and knowledge level. What level of variance do they find acceptable? What materials are they willing to print on? A shop that only offers a few materials shouldn't be a disqualifying factor. A good print shop knows their limits, and if they're restricting their sleeking to foil to specific finishes, that tells me they aren't willing to risk subpar quality on a more challenging material. That's a good thing. Alternately, you could just work with us, which is obviously the best solution, but I'm not biased. Once you've found a print partner you trust, when and why would you pick sleeking foil over another process? As I mentioned earlier, the most important consideration should always be the final product. Will sleeking foil produce the look that you're going for, and how will the product be finished? Because sleeking foil is flat, it works exceptionally well with scoring, folding, and full bleed die cutting applications. How fast do you need it? This can be done very quickly. What material are you printing on? As a general rule, most coated and smooth uncoated papers can be used with this process, with some notable exceptions I'll get into in a moment. Do you need to overprint the foil? Several varieties of sleeking foil are directly printable, letting you design spot accents in almost any color and design you could ask for. The right combination of inks and foils will let you pull off all sorts of unique effects from sheet to sheet. But it's not a one-size-fits-all process. There are good reasons to avoid sleeking foil. First, because the foil sits on top of printed toner, it can be more prone to scratches and flaking under rough handling. If you anticipate something going through the mail or being passed around, consider adding a protective overcoat. Lamination or UV coating are both great options. Second, and most important to consider during the design phase, traditional and modern polymer foil systems have a significant advantage in image registration over sleeking foil. The reasons for this are pretty simple. Paper is essentially a sponge. As it's heated, water is driven out and the paper shrinks. Traditional foil is directly placed, and high-end polymer systems have digital compensation systems to correct for shrink, skew, and distortion. Subsequent print passes on and around sleeking foil all happen on the same printing press, and the overprinted image is the originally designed size being printed on a smaller sheet. Correcting for this is a painstaking manual process, and it's seldom worth it. When you factor in machine tolerances, and sleeking foil just isn't well suited for being used as a knockout design element unless some safety margins are built in. This is also a comparatively slow process, and it quickly becomes inefficient as the scale of a project grows. There's almost always a break-even point where it makes more sense to transition to another embellishment technique. You also want to keep in mind that while there are a lot of stock options, the paper weight can be restrictive. Sleeking is a frustrating, unreliable experience on text weight. We push our clients to 100-pound cover and above. This avoids substrate instability, wrinkling, jams, and a lot of headaches. But let's say none of this applies. Your project is a perfect fit, and you want to know how to make it successful. Here's what to watch out for. First, and most important, the substrate. You can break sleeking foil compatibility into 4 tiers. At the base of the pyramid is printable laminate applied over gloss or silk paper. This is your gold standard. The laminate is engineered to work with the foil, and because it acts as a barrier between the foil and the print, you can apply foil anywhere on the sheet, no matter the surrounding design. As a bonus, the laminate helps to stabilize the sheet, which improves registration in many cases. The next tier up is made of smooth coated stocks. Sleeking is generally compatible with gloss and silk coated materials, although specialty materials can be problematic. Here we need to start watching out for background noise, a defect where the foil sticks to the underlying sheet, producing a sparkly glitter effect. It's pretty, but not desirable. You'll find many shops draw the line here. As we go further up, a shop's available hardware and their willingness to experiment with and abuse the machines become an important factor. Smooth, uncoated stocks are the next tier, and this is where we start watching for patchy coverage. Layers of toner are measured in microns, and every tiny imperfection on a sheet of paper requires more and more toner to be laid down in order to create a smooth surface for the foil. Certain uncoated stocks also use a priming compound that causes extreme levels of background noise, leaving them completely unsuitable for sleeking as a process. The tip of the pyramid is made up of textured, uncoated paper. This is the bleeding edge, more trouble than it's worth section. Most machines can't put down enough ink to make these materials work, and when they do, they're unreliable and temperamental. There are some very promising things on the horizon, and we are actively keeping an eye out for new and improved hardware and materials, so stay tuned. We're always learning new things. So, here's the key takeaway. As we go up this pyramid, we need to apply more ink, more heat, and more pressure to obtain a good result. Every substrate requires a different combination. Too little or too much, and bad things start to happen. For some materials, the combination is flexible enough to be workable. For others, the combination is so specific that trying to make them work is a painful, wasteful exercise in futility. Trust your print partner. Don't try to predict how a paper will behave. Having the right machine helps. For many shops using a traditional toner-based printing press, the cutoff is at silk and gloss stocks simply because the most ink they can put down is 4 layers of 100% density. This isn't enough to work with challenging materials without multiple print passes, which are problematic even before the foil is applied. Indigos are a little different. Because the paper can be held inside the machine for an extended period of time, continually transferring more and more layers, many more substrates open up as an option. To wit, we use 4 layers of black for printable laminate, 6 to 8 for silk-coated stocks, 8 to 12 for smooth uncoated stocks, and we have gone higher just to prove a point. This sheet of Riche cotton has 50 layers of ink applied to obtain this result. You'll hear me reiterate this a few times, but there is a line where common sense exits the building. Just because something is technically possible doesn't mean it's a good idea. Ask me how I know. Okay, so enough tech talk. What can you do with this stuff? First off, here's a look at the color library that we're working with. And this isn't comprehensive. We like Nobelus and Infinity foils as our suppliers, but there are a huge number of finishes from Kurz, Thermotype, Scandicor, and others. We just had to cut it off somewhere before we ran out of shelf space. There are not as many options as there are in hot stamping, but the ability to overprint helps offset that. Sleeking foil can work as a standalone design element or in combination with other printing and foils. We're going to have a look at 3 examples, each of which uses layered foil, laminate, and printing to achieve some really cool effects. First up is Mars. This was an internal sample we built off of NASA JPL artwork, and it's a great showcase for printable laminate and foil. Trying to print this as a knockout would have been incredibly painful. Remember that foil sticks to toner, so it always has to be added first when working with an unlayered sheet. Here, we're using the laminate to avoid this problem, but the art wasn't intended for the foil, so we had to make a few adjustments to the artwork to make it production ready. Designing in foil in mind, will save you a bunch of headaches down the road. Take a look at the zigzag design in the upper right corner. Trying to get this lined up would have been a nightmare. Rather than put myself through that, I just converted the underlying CMYK to a block of color, which would be hidden by the foil. There are still some tricky design elements here. This little spaceship has some unforgiving registration involved. You can usually expect up to a millimeter of wiggle room in any direction on a well-maintained press. That's not a lot, but it matters on designs like this. Next up, we have a piece that reverses the order of operations a bit. This memorial card for Edgar Allan Poe, he's buried in Baltimore, has a really clever use of soft-touch laminate over printable foil. It's a very simple production process that produces a really novel effect. The laminate diffuses the metallic shine, producing a striking shimmer, and it protects the print as a bonus. We love to see finishing processes pull double duty. When teaching new clients about designing for foil, we like to say that a good foil design invites a second and a third look. This card was printed in 2018, and 6 years later, it's still eye-catching. Finally, we have this ridiculously cool business card for artist Meg Kirkpatrick, who we've been working with for a few years now. We actually went through a few iterations on this project, experimenting with pieces from Meg's back catalog, but she had a eureka moment, sketched the final design on a plane ride back from Comic-Con, and took the card to a whole new level. This is the kitchen sink approach. It's got a little bit of everything in it. Printable laminate, printable foil, tone-on-tone, white ink triplexing. There's always a moment when everything clicks for a designer and they understand the full scope of what sleeking foil can do. This was Meg's. In fact, Meg had been working with foil for a few years, but her previous print partner had told her it was impossible to work with more than one color. You might say we took that as a challenge. Next, we're going to talk about file setup. This will move pretty quick, but it's just an overview. Check out our Indigo Edge webinar series for a much more comprehensive look at how this process works. Before that, there are a few things to specifically avoid. First, try to avoid thin lines and ornate scripty fonts with hairline design elements. We frequently have to ask our clients to add a stroke. 1 point thickness is the minimum, otherwise there's just not enough ink density to build up the layers and things start dropping out. Same thing goes for sharp angles. The points often don't pick up the foil properly. Obtuse angles and curves are better. Third, and I know I'm beating a dead horse here, no tight registration. It's a headache for everyone, and it saves a lot of time and hassle in production. If your design requires it, switch to printable laminate or an alternate process. We move most of these jobs to our hot sampler for the sake of consistency. Steer clear of heavy foil floods on uncoated paper. While it's not impossible, it's very difficult to get a consistently good product. There are too many tiny imperfections across a press sheet to iron out all of them, and even a pinprick of missing foil is noticeable. Finally, regrettably, sleeking does not work on anything except smooth stocks and toner-based printing. This means no envelopes and no wide format. As before, we handle these via hot stamping. I'm calling these out as the most common problems we encounter, but there are a laundry list of best practices to be found on our website. There's a link at the end of the presentation. Okay, file setup. Now, I can only speak to this as far as what we require, and in broad strokes as to common requests from other shops. Every printer has their own requirements, but are we the right one? Starting with Adobe Illustrator, or InDesign, they function the same, you'll need to open a couple of tabs that may not be present by default. You'll find these under Windows, where you'll want to open Swatches and Attributes. Beginning with swatches, we're going to define a new spot color. Now, this naming scheme is not standardized. We ask for sleeking foil to be named HP foil, but don't expect that to be the norm. No matter the case, capitalization counts. An improperly named spot color will be flattened into part of the CMYK color build, and the spot ink will not print. Using the drop-down menu, change your color type to spot. We've seen many professional designers miss this critical step. You can double-check if your newly created swatch is a spot color by looking for this small icon in the corner of the preview. The color mode of your spot swatch should be set to CMYK. Assign each spot swatch a bold, simple, and unique color that stands out from the rest of the design. 100% cyan or magenta is a great choice. Your selected color has no effect on the print, but it does help call out the special effects within the file, and it acts as a handy reference point when we're troubleshooting problems with overprint and layering. Your new swatch acts like any other color within Illustrator. It can be applied to any object within the file as a fill or stroke, although it should always be applied to both when present. Once the color swatch has been applied to your file, make sure all spot color elements have been selected and enable overprint and overprint stroke in the attributes window. Important side note, make sure the foil layer in Illustrator is on top of the CMYK design elements. It's counterintuitive, but it matters. Photoshop is really easy. The layering does not matter, the overprint setting is automatic, and the process of defining a spot channel is as easy as pressing a button. Put simply, creating a spot channel within Photoshop involves nothing more complex than creating a selection. The selection can be created using any tool or combination of tools. Once the selection is made, it can be directly converted to a spot channel visible in the Channels tab. The same naming conventions apply here as in Illustrator. It really doesn't matter how you create the selection itself. Pick whichever you're more comfortable or familiar with. The journey doesn't matter so much as the destination here. Once your selection is made, navigate to the Channels tab where you'll find the image broken down into its respective color layers, usually either RGB or CMYK. Hold Ctrl and click the plus button to immediately convert your selection to a spot color. In the new window, define the name, a color to represent the spot ink, and the opacity. This has no effect on the finished print, it is only for file preview purposes. And that's it. Export the file to PDF, and the spot channel will be preserved as a separate layer that we can use for foil. Now, if you don't want to remember all that, or if you're not using a program that supports spot colors, or if you're working with a print shop with a different workflow, don't worry, there's a workaround. Just export two files, one containing your artwork, and the other containing the special effects layer in pure black. We can use this, there are plenty of shops who like this better, and it works just fine. At long last, this brings us to the KISS. For anyone not familiar with this project, the KISS won a Gold Leaf Award from the Foil and Special Effects Association this year. It includes 12 layers of sleeking foil, printable laminate, 5 inks, and the last tattered shreds of my sanity. Here's how we made it. The KISS actually started life as a simple 4-color print designed by Meg Kirkpatrick. It's a protest piece recontextualizing the 1918 Gustav Klimt painting to reflect the power dynamic in a post-Roe v. Wade America. We liked the concept, and I was curious if it would be possible to convert the background text, the complete legal ruling overturning the Dobbs decision, into foil. Meg was on board and provided a new file allowing us to try it. It worked. And then I got to talking with her, and the moment she told me the original painting includes gold, silver, and platinum leaf, I had a terrible idea. That kicked off 6 months of file prep, experimentation, and beating my head against the sleeking foiler until it had submitted to me. We ran into problems. First, Meg, to our mutual horror, had accidentally flattened the original Procreate file and lost the backups in a hard drive crash. We had to reverse engineer the entire thing in Photoshop with extensive use of content-aware fill and duplicate layers. I won't even try to estimate how long that took. Speaking of layers, it turns out the order of the foil matters a lot. The foil needed to be laid down in a very specific sequence. Some colors stick to others stick to everything, and still others stick to nothing but the ink. That took another month to iron out. The silver and gold foil is directly printable. I wanted it to take a step further and to include a third foil in the background. That required adding a layer of sapphire coating, a UV cured primer that improves ink adhesion. The text was raster out of Procreate. We wanted to go smaller, and that meant we needed it to be vector. So I rebuilt the background. We now had half the file in Photoshop, half the file in Illustrator, and there were so many layers that we didn't even dare try to combine them. Right around then, HP debuted yellow UV reactive ink. As soon as I got my hands on it, I reached out to Meg. In for a penny, in for a pound of plutonium, right? It's always nice when I meet a client who's operating on the same wavelength of crazy, because a few days later, she delivered an entirely new layer of artwork that recontextualized the entire print under blacklight. And we still had to produce it. Here's how that looked. We split the production into 3 phases: substrate prep, printing, and foiling. I picked Tango 18-point C2S as the backer. I needed something extremely stable. This turned out to be a mistake. The material is already thick, and once you've shoved it through a printing press and a laminator a few times, it gets even thicker as the water content evaporates. Thick enough that it exceeds the press specifications and jams. Constantly. The first few passes were easy. We printed the back of the sheet in black, then the front in gold, silver, and rose gold foil. These can be stacked with no trouble because the first 2 are printable. The third is not, so the press sheet needed to take a trip through the UV coater for an application of the primer that I mentioned. Then the sheets went back into the press and we put down the CMYK and UV reactive ink. Our press has 7 ink stations, so this only took 1 pass. From there, we added a layer of printable soft touch laminate. And then the hard part started. In total, there are 7 layers of foil on top of the laminate, each of which needed to be perfectly aligned with the ones below. And that's hard enough. Each subsequent print pass had a few casualties. Printable laminate likes to generate static, so the sheets like to stick and slow down inside the machine, and a fraction of a second matters when you're putting ink on paper. The big mistake that I made happened here. That foiling order I mentioned, matte foils need to precede metallic foils, and because I have foolishly picked copper for the text accents, I needed to line up the entire background around those few tiny words. It did not go well. I actually wound up printing the accent words over themselves again because there wasn't enough ink to properly take the foil on the first try, and I was 4 hours into the production run at that point. If you look closely, you'll see some double vision in many of these prints, and those were the good ones. In all, around 12 hours of production were required for the 60 sheets, most of it spent troubleshooting and clearing jams. In the end, about 1 in every 4 press sheets survived quality control. By now it should be obvious that this was never intended to be a production-ready job. Think of this as the printing equivalent of a concept car. We wanted to see how far sleeking foil could be pushed, to know what the practical limits are and where the process starts breaking down. And the answer is way before we finished production. We learned a huge amount about temperature control, paper behavior, and layering techniques, and I will be perfectly happy to never try this again. But we've seen some really cool projects come out of it, and I've met some great people, and I think that makes the insanity worth it.